This is Minnesota Liberty, brought to you by the Libertarian Party of Minnesota, bringing you peace, prosperity, and freedom from the land of 10,000 lakes.
Welcome back to Minnesota Liberty. My name is James. I have a very special guest tonight, and you'll notice that there's only one of me, so you might be able to guess who it is. But before we get into the guest, let me tell you about the affiliate meetings and other events that are coming up for the Libertarian Party of Minnesota. So I am streaming and recording on the 3rd of May, 2023. So coming up this month, we've got the CD4 Liberty meetup at Stout's Pub, and I believe that's in St. Paul. CD2 on the 11th is at Triggers in Prior Lake. And then on the 15th, we've got our monthly executive committee meeting, which is open to all party members. We meet via Zoom and at the office in Golden Valley. And then finally, on the 18th, a big event being hosted by the women's affiliate of, what are those two counties? Goodhue and Dakota County. I'm so sorry to that affiliate. I can never get the name right. It is the Libertarian Women of Dakota and Goodhue Counties affiliate. And they're hosting a women's health and data privacy event featuring Twyla Brace, who is an expert on both of those subjects. I'm going to be there live and in person, and I encourage everyone else to turn out if you can. That is on May 18th at the Hastings American Legion Post 47. For times and maps and all that stuff, head over to lpmn.org/events. And that page is kept updated. So, if you didn't hear your affiliate, that just means that we haven't posted it yet, but it'll be there. So keep an eye on that page. Once again, lpmn.org/events. And so without further ado, let me bring on the guest for the evening, who is typically my co-host, or really like the main host of the show. And I'm the co-host, I guess. Anyway, my guest is Rebecca Whiting, Vice Chair. Madam Vice Chair, how's it going? Good to see you.
Good. How are you?
Good. All right, so we are kicking off Veterans Week, or Veterans Month, I guess, or a Veterans Series. There's going to be several vets that you're going to be interviewing, but I wanted to get you in front of the camera for the first one because you are a vet in your own right. You and your husband Keith both. Keith wasn't available tonight, otherwise we might have had him on.
Yeah.
So what branch did you serve in?
The Army.
Mm-hmm.
So active duty Army and National Guard. I did both.
Oh, nice. Thank you for your service. Do we still say that? Is that still a thing?
I don't know. It's always weird. So I just
it does. One time I was at the airport and this very, very just ancient man in a wheelchair and a Korea hat was coming through security, and this other very old woman came up to him and thanked him for his service. And I was like, man, that goes way, way back. That's before my parents were born.
Yeah. Korea War was a long time ago.
How does it? I don't know. I've always been like the kind of libertarian who never has had any sort of action at all. And so I smugly would be like, I don't support the troops because they're just all part of the machine. In fact, I got into a big fight with Bull Johnson once. It almost turned into a really big thing over the term murder cult, which I don't know if it was coined by Shane Hazel, but he uses it a lot. He's a libertarian down in Georgia, and he's also a veteran. What do you think about the kind of the rhetoric that comes out of libertarian circles as it pertains to military and war and things like that? Do you think that we can be a little too harsh, or are you on board with that?
I mean, I guess if specifically the term murder cult would imply that people are joining to murder. Mm-hmm. So I would stray away from that because most people join for, a long list of reasons, and that's never one of them. So they're looking for stability. They're looking for a way out of their hometown. They're looking for, something like college. They typically come from poor backgrounds, or we come from, I guess, because I'm part of that, veterans in it, and always come from southern states because, there's a high level of poverty down there. So, and I'm from Mississippi. That's why I joined. There wasn't, when I graduated high school, there wasn't a lot of opportunity. There wasn't anything, especially as a female, I could do outside of like, working in a fast food place. I didn't have family support, that kind of thing. So at one point, when I joined, it was a matter of, it was no longer a matter of why I should, but why I shouldn't. But back then too, there were no wars.
Mhm.
That was before 9/11. That was before Iraq, so it was just a job you were going to do.
Yeah.
And they were going to teach you and give you the skills and that kind of stuff. And I was going to do my time in and joined. I really enjoyed it. And so once I left basic training and AIT, I just kind of decided I was going to be a lifer. So those terms and all those kinds of things, there's just, there's people join for a variety of reasons. It's usually in good faith. So when the things that happen that cause, the events like Iraq, Afghanistan, there's the reason that there's this influx of veterans into Libertarian Party. It's because that we joined on good faith. And it was the government who used our, our kind of naive mentality, wanting to do good things. They used that to their advantage, and they betrayed the trust, so.
It has always seemed a little bit strange to me that so many vets come from the South, and that the South is kind of like the hotbed of nationalism when, prior to the Civil War, it was, there was no nationalism in the South because they saw the country such as it was as sort of like a bunch of, just literally independent states. And nationalism didn't really come into the picture. Yeah, I know. It always seems like a weird like dissonance there. Like it's kind of like the "Don't tread on me" right next to the blue line flag. Where do you think that comes from?
when you have like a people that are typically very poor, there's not, like I said, there's not a lot of opportunity in the South. I mean, just now are we starting to see cities there. I mean, you have cities like Atlanta in Georgia, and you have some bigger cities, New Orleans, for instance, in Louisiana. And that's where I came from, is right on the Mississippi, Louisiana coast, very, very far south. But it's hard to describe just the level. I knew people that basically lived in shacks in high school. Like that was their reality. And that wasn't a long time ago, like less than 25 years ago. So I grew up with people that got on the bus who lived in, just these run down houses that didn't have anything. They might have had 3 different sets of clothes. I knew a girl who had 3 different sets of clothes, and she just alternated her clothes. Like, they had so little. So when you have people that just have very little material possessions, they have very little opportunity for the future. I mean, all they have left is their pride. So that's got to be based off of something. In the South, that's typically based off of, that they're Southern. So there is a lot of national pride in the South. And I still feel like I'm never going to call myself a Minnesotan because I'm a Southerner. So that's just,
I'm a Texan, and I love Minnesota, and I really don't, I don't have any plans to move or anything like that, but I don't consider myself a Minnesotan really. No. I'm a Texan, and I don't think Minnesotans really grasp that sort of that pride of place that people in the South specifically have. And I don't call myself a Southerner either.
Yeah, you would have to come to terms with being a Yankee, and that's basically a derogatory term in the South still. So I mean, that's not going to happen,
Yeah, I guess so. It's a very interesting dynamic. And the other thing is though, when people find out that I'm from Texas up here, and this is we're not trying to shit on Minnesota. This is home. It's just not our native home, if that makes sense.
Right. No, it is. Yeah, I was here. This is the way it is.
Yeah, when people find out where I'm from originally, they almost act with like sympathy. They're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Like, you got here as soon as you could, huh?"
No.
I don't know.
No.
Like,
Don't be sorry for me. I am sorry for you.
you've never experienced it. And I mean, Southern hospitality is preferable to Minnesota nice, in my opinion. Although I have a feeling absolutely. Minnesotans, like I have a lot of Minnesotan friends who, they'll travel down there and experience it, and they're like, "Oh my God, it's so passive aggressive. I hate it." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? That's what this is."
Yeah.
Bless your heart.
People there will like just that, if they're feeling something, they're just gonna say it out loud, and you always know where people stand because that's just part of the culture. Yeah. And they expect you to be exactly like that back to them. So it's not offensive, just being intentional and what you say, and it's not picking a fight, it's just how it is.
Kevin says Minnesotans don't know good barbecue, which that is true. Although I have found a couple of really good places. There's a place up in Champlin that they have another location in Minneapolis. God, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But anyway, it's real good. It's actually right by Nate Atkins' house. If anybody knows where he lives, down in South Minneapolis. Man, if I could remember it, I would say the name. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, there is that. There's like the culture, there's the food, there's the barbecue, like Kevin mentioned. So how did you end up in Minnesota, I guess, as a Southerner?
Yeah, the only way that would happen is by marrying somebody from Minnesota. Yeah. And in addition to that, saying, I am never moving to Minnesota. And so then, that is the way the universe works. And all of a sudden you find yourself in Minnesota. That's the only way. Everybody I know who's moved up here has moved up here and like is established here, is here for their other half, so I met somebody in the Army and I didn't even know Minnesotans existed, honestly.
See, I had family up here. Like I
was never a state that I
was little.
Yeah, well, I'd never been north of the Mason-Dixon line, honestly, before I met somebody from Minnesota, and very.
All right, so back on the veteran stuff, I guess we can sit here and do bios forever, but 9/11 was obviously a line of demarcation for U.S. foreign policy, for war and peace, for just sort of the nature of the military. What happened after 9/11? Like, what happened on 9/11? What was that like? Where were you? And like, what? Did you know that everything was about to change? Like, was it evident?
Oh yeah, that was. So I was still in the National Guard. I had joined the Mississippi National Guard first, and I'd finished all my training. I was back at my unit. We were doing our, the National Guard thing, which is once a month, 2 weeks out of the year. And when I left basic training in AIT and I'd done all my training, I knew that I had really enjoyed the training. I enjoyed the structure. I had enjoyed feeling like I was part of something important, and that was a significant part of what I was missing, especially at the time I was only 19. And so when 9/11 happened, I was in college and I had an early class that morning. So it was an 8 o'clock class. And I was playing soccer in college too. So I'd been up for a while. We did all this training in the morning and then we went to class. And went to my 8 o'clock class and sat down. We were supposed to take a test that day. And somebody came in right before the instructor closed the door and was like, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center. And I immediately got this like gut feeling in my stomach. Like, it's hard to describe, but just that, when you know internally that something is very, very wrong and something has changed and something's going on. And I didn't even finish the test. I just wrote my name on it, filled out, because I couldn't get past that feeling, turned it in and went back to my dorm room. And everybody else there didn't have an early morning class. They had the TV on. And right as the plane flew into the World Trade Center. And I don't know. I just knew that that's, once is a coincidence, twice is a plan, so something was going on. And then Bush at the time came on and said, we're at a state of war. And I immediately knew what that meant for me, because I'd already been through basic training. I'd already been through AIT, the advanced individual training. And part of my advanced individual training, so the AIT, was I went to be a medic. So as a combat medic, that was a lot of our training was, if the medics are busy, things are going very wrong. And a lot of our training was around scenarios and, these just the worst kind of, that's what we were training for, because that's what we had to be prepared for. But at the time, I didn't, there was no war. And so having had just gone through that and hearing that on the TV, I was like, this is it. I just know, like, this is a big deal. And here it is. And I didn't know joining that's what was going to happen, obviously. But, just hearing those words and watching the second plane and watching Eric, it's just, it's like a feeling that you can't ever separate yourself from. So the intensity of what happened and everything and what it meant for me specifically, and knowing how it was going to impact my future, I instantly knew that. So that was like a, your life is going one direction, and then something like, immediately in that moment that everything's different.
And then what did you do?
Well, because I was in the National Guard, at that time, so I had a boyfriend at the time who was active duty, and he was in Ranger Battalion. And Ranger Battalion they're not special forces, they're special operations. So, but they're on regular rotation for being like something major happens, like 9/11. And so they were on the highest, they were basically on call when 9/11 happened. It's called RF1. And they immediately left. They packed up their stuff and left. And so for several months, where he was, I didn't know what was going on, because it's what the Army calls OPSEC, operational security, means that there has to be secrecy, and there has to be, no, any kind of flow of communication has to happen through secure channels. And the only people that were allowed to maybe have a little information about where their soldiers were the people that were like directly related, wives, that kind of stuff, which I wasn't. I was just a girlfriend. So, he left, that changed. And then, but as far as the rest of the Army, the bases changed. You used to be able to just drive straight on to an Army base. When I was in training, you just drove straight on. There was nobody stopping you. After that, they started checking IDs and checking all this stuff. And they set up checkpoints everywhere on the Army bases. And then, but, until Iraq happened, the rest of the Army the rest of the military didn't really get, there wasn't a lot of presence on the ground in Afghanistan. It was just it took off a little slow. For me, I joined, it was my opportunity to get out of my National Guard contract and go active duty. National Guard contracts last 8 years. And because of 9/11, they were letting people cut their contracts short to go active duty. And so I took up that opportunity. And so that was in September. By February, I was active duty and stationed in Georgia.
And so, I don't really know how like the military works even.
Yeah.
When you go active duty, like, were you automatically a medic, or did you like have to redo training, or?
No, because Army National Guard is still Army. It's just it's basically comes down to funding. So The funding for National Guard is mostly through the states. They're controlled by the governor. That's why you have the Mississippi, Louisiana National Guard. It's all, state specific. There's also reserve, which is federal. That's different because so active duty, that's the reserves, active duty Army, but it's all Army, right? Basic training, all your job training, all that kind of stuff. That's all still the same.
So how long before you were deployed?
That was February of 2002 is when I went active duty. Iraq kicked off 2003. And by July of 2004, I was in Iraq.
Okay. And so were you just kind of sitting there waiting until that happened, or like what was life like in the interim?
Yeah, I got stationed at what they call a medac unit. So medics, not only are you on the line with field brigades, so your brigades that. So the way the structure is that you have a different variety of different types of units. You have your brigades that go out and like their infantry brigades or their armor brigades or that kind of thing. And then you have brigades that are for training. And then you also have hospital units. And the hospital units mostly maintain, as for a medic anyways, hospital units maintain like the Army hospitals on the bases. We staffed the what was called a TMC, a troop medical clinic for training units, and that's what I did. That was my first job, active duty, was at a troop medical clinic on Fort Benning, Georgia, for airborne school. We did airborne school, at school. So any of the types of schools that were on main post at Fort Benning, and there was a lot of them. But that was what we did, medical support for those schools. And so when I went active duty until I went to Iraq, that's what I was doing, was at a medac unit, taking care of injuries and people that were training and gotten hurt or sick or, any of that kind of stuff.
All right. I'm just going to, real quick, we've been having some technical difficulties that I've been clicking around on. I hope my mic wasn't picking that up too much. But I apologize to the people watching on Facebook. I had to restart the feed because it was erroring out. YouTube seems to be going smoothly, though, so that's good. I think this is like the first or second episode that we've live streamed. We've always pre-recorded them and then streamed later. So, bear with us on the technical stuff. Okay, so I would imagine that being a medic in the Army in the middle of a violent conflict, you see some pretty crazy shit. Do you have any stories that you're okay telling?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's see. So, when I went to Iraq, it was July 2004, actually went to Korea first. And then the unit that I went to in Korea was tasked to go to Iraq. So I went to Korea, immediately turned around and went to Iraq through there. So we got tasked to go to the Al-Anbar province in Iraq, which is Ramadi, Fallujah, Habaniya. So there's like all these major cities in Iraq that you may or may not be familiar with, but it's called the Al-Anbar province. And that was the hot spot when we went. So if you remember...
I've listened to enough Scott Horton to recognize these names.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's where we went. We went to Ramadi in 2004. Ramadi was a city that just didn't have... There was no control. There was no... there was a presence. We were there, but it wasn't, it was just, I don't know how to describe it. Like the Wild West of Iraq. So, we didn't have any control of the city whatsoever. We also, that meant that when there was a lot of stuff happening, So prior to us going there, and I remember seeing this on, like, I don't know, news channel, CNN or something, that they, in Fallujah, they had been attacking contractors and like dragging their bodies through the streets, that kind of stuff. We got there right after that happened. Ramadi is just, I think it's just west of Fallujah. It's just, but like sister city. So we were there when the Battle of Fallujah happened. And when the Battle of Fallujah happened, we were prepared to take in mass casualties. We were attached to a Marine division. And after the Battle of Fallujah, and I believe that was in November or December of 2004 is when that happened. So our level of, which was already pretty high, but our level of like casualty rates and incidences and firefights increased after the Battle of Fallujah. Our aid station rate of casualties for the entire theater, our brigade had the highest rate of casualties for the entire theater. I think it might have been throughout the entirety of the wars, both wars, Iraq and Afghanistan, from beginning to end. Like, we went in at combat strength, we came home under combat strength. We were being supplemented by other units to keep our mission going because we'd lost so many people.
Jeez.
So yeah, there was a lot of things that happened from that. I'm trying to, I don't know, it's something that's, I mean, so one of the things that they use a lot of are, or they did, were improvised explosive devices. I think I might be having connection issues also. But improvised explosive devices could be buried in the roads. They could be put into a pile of garbage, set aside, you know, something that could be easily hidden. And then they could either be detonated by like a timer or by a cell phone or by infrared. If you drove by, they blew up. It was just, there was a wide variety of what they could do. And that was the main thing that we saw injury wise. We saw a lot of gunshot wounds. We had one, I guess, actually, this was pretty significant. We had a sniper, and we had this glass factory right outside of our camp that was, I'm pretty sure was blown up after we left because it was an issue. But we had a sniper that was hiding in the glass factory. But you could see from the glass factory our entire camp from that, because it was up high, and there's nothing out there, it's desert. So there's, nothing to break the line of sight. And this sniper was getting one person a day on our base, oftentimes through the, like, because the Humvee would have like the combat glass. Once we got up armor, the windows were only like this big. She could hit somebody through that window while the Humvee was moving, even because you had to wear your Kevlar when you're in a moving vehicle. That's just an Army rule. And it was enough to be able to go through the Kevlar, one shot, one person a day. They always died. They never lived. So, and like I said, it was a woman that was doing it. They ended up getting her Chechnyan. So not even Iraqi. She was a Chechnyan. Yeah.
So were Chechnya and Iraq allied at that point, or was she just like a free?
No, they were mercenaries. They were being paid to be there.
That's interesting. What about our use of mercenaries? I always heard that, like, Dick Cheney's company, Halliburton, like, supplied a ton of our fighting troops as mercenaries. I don't know if that's true or not. Yeah. This was let me add a little bit of context. So back then I was like way on the left, and the left-wing anti-war movement has just as many crazy conspiracy theories as the libertarian
I'm sure.
movement in general, basically. So, like, Halliburton was the devil back then, according to left-wing politics. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. I'm guessing there's a little bit more nuance to what they were doing over there. But can you maybe set the record straight if you know?
So, I mean, my perspective is limited because of, our situation, our circumstances. We pretty much are, who we worked with was usually kept within our own companies and our own units and our own brigade. We didn't get tasked out to, for other missions. So like SIS had their own mission in Iraq. Even the Rangers, they had their own mission. We had our own mission. We were attached to a Marine division, like their own purpose of being there. However, though, because we were medics, that's kind of like this universal job. I don't know specifically. So people are going to be very, like I said, I mentioned operational security earlier. They're going to be very cautious about what they're saying and who they're saying it to. I know that, so it was a NATO thing, right? So we also saw troops from other countries. But I know KBR was who ran our DFAC, our dining facility on Ramadi.
KBR,
and
it's Kellogg Brown and Root.
Was KBR at Halliburton?
Yeah, they're a subsidiary of Halliburton. It's all coming back.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So KBR, they ran all like the DFAC, they ran the cleanup crews, they ran, that was who it was. And then as far as like,
what is DFAC? You've mentioned that twice, so I want to get the definition.
Dining facility. The Army is notorious with acronyms.
Boring.
Why say something? Why say like all the words? Yeah.
I like it. Okay.
So, yeah, but we because we were the aid station and we were the central aid station for the area, we saw a lot of people from a variety of backgrounds who had different missions. I remember one time, and they were, if I was having to guess who they were, I would say some sort of like a English. Okay, so MI6, MI7, whatever it is, I'm not sure. They drove up. We got a lot of times we had a radio at our aid station, and sometimes we'd get information, sometimes we wouldn't. Sometimes we got limited information, sometimes we got accurate. I mean, so. But most people, when they came to our aid station, drove up in military type vehicles. And these guys didn't. They Toyota truck, which was very typical. There was a lot of Toyota trucks, and jumped out, and they'd been hit by an IED and were coming to our aid station to get checked out. And I was sitting at our smoking pit, and I was a smoker back then. And they come out of the aid station, and they're you can kind of tell the cargo pants, the facial hair, you can kind of tell they have what they look like and what their bad English accents. And I was like, so where are you guys from? Because while they're checking all their equipment, and I'm like, this isn't typical Army standard equipment, like they were like pulling things out and like making sure it was all fine. I was like, hey, I'm looking at stuff. I'm like, this looks like some of this looks like stuff straight out of a James Bond movie. And the English accents, that's just what it reminded me of. And I asked him, I was like, where are you guys from? And he was like, oh, we're generator mechanics. And I was like, I don't think you're generator mechanics. So, I don't think that's true.
That's funny. Man, I would love to like know what their real mission was. That's really interesting. If I had to guess, I would say some sort of like CIA type, but obviously not American. Interesting. So what do the intelligence agencies do in the middle of a war zone? And like, what would the CIA do versus Army intelligence? Or is that classified?
Well, I mean, maybe it is to somebody, but I was a mech, so that's not my job. But I know when we had to go get mission updates or that kind of stuff, I was allowed to go into our training operational center, or what we called a talk. And to be able to like see the maps and see when they had all their stuff out, so I could go in and get that information. And I could go to the briefings for going to like change or be different because I had a security clearance. It wasn't a very big security clearance. It was just enough to like be able to like be the person that went into the room, but that was about it, you know? So for military intelligence, that kind of stuff, I mean, I honestly, I don't know, because that's not something we did a lot of. We were mostly dealing with, you know, the things that happened immediately and just responding to the situation or the moment, and didn't have a lot of hand in planning and that kind of stuff.
That makes sense. Well, tell me about medic training. So like, you're not a doctor, obviously, but like, what are you doing in medic as a medic that like, say, I mean, is it just similar to a paramedic in civilian life, or because I know you're doing paramedic training right now too?
Yeah, well, EMT.
EMT. Sorry, I get the, I know those are different, and I have a friend who's an EMT, and he hates it when I call him a paramedic. So.
Yeah, it's a little different. There's, you know, different levels. The training that I'm currently going through is an EMT. When you're an Army medic, you're required to have an EMT license, and I did have one after I got out of the Army, and I went through 2 deployments to Iraq. So I was in Ramadi the first time, Baghdad the second time, and I went to Baghdad in 06 and 07 during the surge. That's where I was at. And then, so after I got out of the Army, I was just burnt out, and I let my license go. You know, I had no interest in using it, and didn't really see a future in being part of having anything to do with medical. Although I do enjoy it, but I was just, you know, like Iraq had been too much in a lot of aspects. So I was ready to just step away for good. But the difference between an Army medic and a paramedic is that an Army medic has a lot more freedom. So we are allowed to do almost anything. We operated in our aid station. We operated under the guidance of doctors or physician's assistants, and they were the you know, the people in charge because they had the, you know, the highest training. However, out in the field or out in the streets or out in the city, or, you know, being on the line, and that was my second job. During our second deployment, that's what I did. I wasn't in an aid station, and we were constantly doing missions back and forth, and in the cities, we were out almost every night. And you know, when something happens, and suddenly you find yourself, you are the person with the highest level of training. Right. So you do what you have to do, and there's no limits. Like if you find yourself in a situation, you know, nobody's going to come and check your certification, you know? Right. So we had a lot more opportunity to learn things and do things because there was the possibility that we might have to use them, and we might have to use it independently. And so we had to know what we were doing independently. Yeah. Certifications be damned, basically.
So were you doing like minor surgeries and stuff like that even?
In our aid station, we did chest tubes, central lines. We did have to deal with amputations, a lot of, you know, severe injuries. If there was anything that needed to be done that was more complex than that, because our purpose was, we were an echelon 2. So the way the medical like hierarchy is basically like a line medic is an echelon 1, and then they are like a paramedic or an EMT. You know, your job is just to stabilize your casualty and get them to the next group of people who have more opportunity to save them as fast as you can and keep them alive. And so there, the aid stations were echelon 2s. And that's where our doctors and our physician's assistants were. That's where we took our aid. And then they would stabilize them further. So if they had like collapsed lungs, or they were bleeding out, or they needed immediate, you know, medications, pain treatment, that kind of stuff. Burns, we saw a lot of burn victims. That was where they did further help stabilize them. But the goal in the aid station was still to get people stabilized as fast as we can, or we could, and get them put on a helicopter to get them sent up to the next echelon, which also had more capabilities. So in our situation, there were a few times, one in particular I can think of, and this kind of, I don't know, you find some humor in this story, because it didn't involve American troops, it involved Iraqi troops. And I don't know, it's silly. Anyways, we had, and it was in the middle of this intense sandstorm. So no helicopters were coming in. Nothing was landing on our LZ. There was no movement at all because the sandstorm was just, I mean, you know, you couldn't breathe, you couldn't see, you couldn't do anything, right? And for whatever reason, the sergeant major to the Iraqi army and the Iraqi police chief had a misfire in the arms room and ended up getting shot with an AK like 7 or 8 times. So they bring him to our aid station. I can't remember which one got shot, if it was the Iraqi police guy or the Iraqi army guy. One of them got shot up, and what he really needed was to be sent on a helicopter because, he had intense injuries. He was in critical situation, but we couldn't get a helicopter. We couldn't get anybody to land. We're not going to get anybody to go. And so we actually called the Special Forces docs I'll say that in a second. The Special Forces docs have a lot more capability. They have a lot more training. They have a lot more resources. They have a lot more experience than even Army doctors do. Mm-hmm. And they called the Special Forces docs in, and the Special Forces docs did surgery on him right there at our aid station in the middle of the sandstorm because we couldn't move him. And then we ended up having to transport him on the ground instead of by a helicopter with a field ambulance. Anyways, it was a mess, but and I don't remember what the question was actually, but
I think I just asked you for story.
That was what happened. Oh yeah. Okay. So there's the story.
Yeah. So were these enemy combatants that you were treating there, or was this like after the fall of Saddam?
No, they were.
Now you guys are fighting together.
The Iraqi army was an ally. We were training them.
Yeah, that's okay. That's what I thought.
Yeah. And the Iraqi police were supposed to be allies also, but they were notoriously corrupt.
Oh, sure.
I mean, every time we had a major incident, it was an Iraqi police checkpoint. So that's, take that for what it's worth. But
so you are like famously the mom of a whole bunch of kids. Any chance any of them are going to join the service?
My oldest was planning on joining the National Guard. And she was 16 when 2020 happened. And then through all the riots in Minneapolis and all that kind of stuff, and seeing how the National Guard was going to be used, and just called, and she was like, nah, never mind. And I was like, that's probably good at this point. And then there was all the, the forced vaccination and all that kind of stuff that the military was, that was the situation. The military, if you're in the military, you don't get an option about vaccines. Mm-hmm. They just tell you what you're going to get. And so because of all that, she decided not to join, which was she didn't. So it is a different time.
Yeah. Yeah. That was really crazy. Thankfully I was down in Texas visiting my family that weekend. It happened to be the weekend of the Libertarian National Convention, which was supposed to take place in Austin, but it took place over Zoom instead. So my partner and I were down in Dallas, and I was watching the convention on Zoom, and because I was a delegate, and he was watching the riots and everything on like all the different Facebook live streams and stuff. And one of our like close, neighbors in our neighborhood, she was just out on her porch trying to see what was going on, and the National Guard was like ordering her back in the house and like, threatening to fire beanbags at her and stuff. I can't imagine being forced to do that, and let alone kill people. I don't know if I could do it. Do they like, how do they desensitize you? How do they make it so that it's possible for you to, shoot beanbags at your neighbors or, kill Iraqis?
There's just this mental, a lot of it is training. So when you're doing the same steps over and over and over again, and this was especially even as a medic too. So, I mean, this applies to a whole lot of different types of scenarios. But part of being trained in something is that, you've done it so much. Makes the green grass grow. Blood and guts. That's the answer to that question. So, so you're doing the training over and over and over again. And so when you're in the situation that you have to use your weapon, or you have to just throw a tourniquet on because blood's squirting everywhere, or you're, whatever it is, because of the level of, like just you're all hyped up about it and all that kind of stuff, your training kicks in. You don't even think about it. You just do it. Yeah. So if you're in a situation where you have to use your weapon, you just do. I mean, it comes down to them or you, and people's survival instincts kick in, your training kicks in, you just react. I mean, it's just at that point, it comes down to muscle memory. Mm-hmm. The people who don't pull the trigger, yeah, that's really what it is. The people who don't pull the trigger and pause to think about it, they're the ones that become casualties themselves, right? So you're already in that situation. It's either them or you, and you got to figure that out. So
so you mentioned just a couple of minutes ago that you were kind of, stationed in like the overnight shift driving around a city. I'm just kind of imagining you like patrolling these seemingly empty streets, but like, who knows what's on top of that building over. Like, I get nervous driving around Minneapolis after dark. Like, I can't imagine being in a war zone after dark.
Yeah.
Was that just completely nerve-wracking, or was it just that's my job, I'm going to go do it?
When you're doing it every night, it's a little different. Yeah. And so there's a saying in the Army that complacency kills. You're not supposed to be comfortable with it, because when you're comfortable with it, then you start not paying as close of attention. You start dropping the ball. You just get relaxed, and that's when things happen. So what you have to really do is just, this is the situation. These are the things that could harm us, basically. And you really just got to overcome, that mentally, and still be able to, do what you have to do, still be out there, but knowing the risks and being able to be okay with them. So.
And then I guess just to kind of start closing it out, how have you used your military training as a mom, as a homesteader, as an activist, as vice chair of the Libertarian Party of Minnesota, if you have, like how has that translated into your real life?
Did you say as a mom too?
Yeah, everything.
So I don't mean to do this. I don't think I mean to, but I have a lot of kids. Yeah. And it comes down to their good behavior or my mental stability, right? So I just kind of run the house like, I don't want to say like, because they're not soldiers, but like if I tell them to do something, I expect this is the way we're going to do it. And it you deal with kids a little different than you do soldiers, but I just sure. You're firm, and some of my kids actually will tell you that I'm scary. I don't think I'm scary, but
I don't think you're scary.
But there's I think is partially it's just like this level of we don't want to, we're going to do what mom said, don't we know we're going to get in trouble, or whatever it is like that. So and just this, I don't know, this boldness and just I guess I'm not sure. When you're you have a job and you're like, I guess for the Libertarian Party, and I call it a mission, and this may be a bad word in the Libertarian Party, but it's like a mission.
Yeah.
And the hurdles that we are facing as far as like the government oppression and government authoritarianism is significant. Those are all very large hurdles. And a weak person is going to crumble in face of that adversity. So I guess, if anything, just taking the hard things, overcoming them, overcoming them mentally, physically, whatever it is, and still being able to stand up and confront them and, deal with it. That's probably one of the things, is just be able to mentally deal with hard situations. And I mean, for the Libertarian Party, because of what we're facing, there's going to be a lot of that. So, and the more effective that we get, the more that we'll see.
I've always, you hear the phrase, you got to do what you got to do, like a lot. Or at least you used to. I guess people don't really say it as much these days, but and this is just me kind of fanboying, really, but you are the embodiment of, you got to do what you got to do. Like every time I open Facebook, for instance, you've got a different thing that you've just done, whether it's running for school board or delivering a calf, 11 months pregnant and in a freezing, muddy, emergency situation where you can't get a hold of your husband, like just all of these, your crazy neighbor, you kept it peaceful. You didn't lose your cool against him. And, eventually the problem solved itself because you kind of just knew it would. It's just a very admirable quality. And I figure, maybe being raised in a, kind of poor community must have had that kind of effect on you. But also I would imagine that the military training and probably personality and everything just sort of all came together to make this kind of superhero of a person, which is cool. It's great. I'm glad that we have you. Are there any words of wisdom or any things that you want to plug before we close out?
No, I don't have any words of wisdom, but actually next week's and who I had intended on having this week, and I'm actually the backup because I know. Screwed up the schedule.
I tried to sell this earlier as this was all planned out, but we just decided 10 minutes ago that you were going to be the guest.
I know, and I was actually trying to avoid this because it was like, oh, there's all these, we have so many veterans in the Libertarian Party of Minnesota, and they all have like stories and things and so I don't know. I was like, I'm just gonna focus on them and try to get them all, and then I screwed up the schedule, right? So the person next week is a former Special Forces Army, did 26 years, like you were talking about fanboying. Like when I met him, I was like, oh my goodness, you were like, and he was a medic too. So
oh, cool.
That's, that was like, anyways, I respect him significantly, just what he did and his job and his training level and all that kind of stuff. It's just, I can't wait to talk to him. So, and that's next week. So, but he is also part of the Libertarian Party, and he's just, it's going to be a good interview. So I guess that's what I'll do. You want to give up who it is,
or do you want it to be a surprise?
Yeah. What's that?
Do you want to tell who it is, or do you want to make it a surprise?
Oh, Bob Seifert. He's out in Western Minnesota. I don't actually know what city, maybe Crookston, something, like that. But yeah, it's going to be a good interview.
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy too. We've only met a couple of times, but I've always enjoyed talking to him. And he bought my hot sauce at the auction, which I still owe him like a couple of whiskey glasses that came with it that broke in shipping. So I hope I see him soon. Anyway, all right, great. Well, let's just leave it there. Rebecca, thank you so much for filling in for the guest. And next week I'm not going to be here, so you might be on your own. If you are, great. If you're not, we'll find somebody else. I'm going to be on vacation, so a much needed vacation. I've only been in this role for a couple of weeks, and already I'm just pulling my hair out. So great. Thank you so much. Thank you to the few people who jumped in the chat, Kevin especially. We will see you in a week. Until then, keep living free.